I received a letter last week from a Western nun that lives in India who writes from time to time. And she was talking about offering opinions, and advice. So I thought I would read a little bit from her letter. And she included a poem in it. Okay. So she said, as I may have shared with you directly or indirectly, I come from a background of violence. For years I was in a toxic relationship. I learned at an early age through my father's example to take violence from someone you love and never strike back. As a result, all my anger went inwards to the point that I no longer needed an outside abuser, as I had become quite good at doing it to myself. The easier, softer way is still something I am working on. Now I behave with my speech as how I behave with my speech has been particularly of interest to me. More often than not, I learn things through observing other people's behavior. I am not yet invested in this community where she's living right now on a daily basis. It is easy to be an observer, and in my observations, I begin to hear the underlying tones of conversations and observe people's bodies during conversations. What became really apparent to me through my observation was how we give our opinions on so many things and how we become so intense when doing so. Is she talking about me? I noticed that sometimes people got very upset when they heard opinions they didn't agree with, and happy when they hear what they wanted to hear. Does this sound like the worldly concerns? When I say opinions, I also mean advice. I then began to look at how and when I give my opinion. Then it got juicy. Then a bit bitter as well. I realized I spend most of my time giving my opinions and advice, even if not spoken directly. How quickly I am willing to give advice. This is especially tricky now that I am ordained, because I don't want to give advice that is not asked for. It is not my business to do so. At least I strongly feel this, but it's difficult to break such a deep habit. I have come to the conclusion that giving one's opinions and advice when not asked for is a form of violence. Would you agree with this? I would really appreciate your opinion on this, as I value it a great deal. Actually, I feel violence is a bit too strong of a word for advice and opinions, but I understand where she's going. I want to respect other people's boundaries. I cannot help but think that I, more often than not, don't. I feel I am committing a form of violence and stepping all over other people's boundaries whenever I open my mouth to give my opinion and advice without permission. And then she attached a poem. Okay. The poem is called I. How subtle you are. You walk with me all day long. I am often not even aware that you are there. You make yourself known, sometimes in very obvious ways. More often than not, you linger in the recesses of my mind, manifesting yourself through the most interesting ways. How subtle you are, speaking the words of advice unsolicited to anyone who has ears. Sometimes you are aggressive, sometimes neutral, sometimes seemingly loving and with great appeal. Whatever form you take through my body, it's very clear your intent is always your own protection, my dear. How subtle you are. Yet I know, dear ego, your greatest weapon is your opinion. As nothing more clearly says, I am here. The ego has no boundaries and respects no one else's. Therefore, my closest enemy is always near. Yet I pay attention. I lay naked the truth before me. Therefore, I have no fear in confronting you. At the very least, you are my tiger to be tamed. How subtle you are. Awareness is my weapon. Love for others, my motivation. I stand firm on the battleground of my mind. As you are my only enemy, therefore your violence in all forms, no matter how subtle they are, will be challenged until they cease to manifest. I have no choice. It is my duty to do so, as I have this solemn vow. Okay, so I really admire her self-honesty and her determination. What I think there's danger of is sometimes, being the extremists that we are, we go from offering our opinion on every small thing to withdrawing and not commenting on things that need to be commented on. Yeah. So I think the real wisdom is, knowing when we need to comment and say something and when we need to be quiet, instead of making it an all or nothing ball game. Yeah. Because there's many situations we can see with the violence and hatred in our country right now, that if we say, oh, it's just my opinion, I will keep quiet, and we don't say anything about gun control, we don't say anything about bigotry, then we're helping those things to increase, aren't we? Yeah. So we need to know when to speak up and how to speak up. Yeah. That is very different from sticking our nose in everybody else's business and offering advice and opinions that they don't really need at this particular time. However, sometimes people are blind and are slipping down that hill. And if we don't offer our opinion or our advice, we're, not being responsible friends. Okay? So again, I think there's some kind of balance in here, knowing when as we try and get our opinion out, to keep our mouth closed, and knowing when, out of compassion, to reach out and when to speak up. Okay? But I think in terms of the abundance of our unasked for opinions, she's quite on the spot there about reining them in and looking at the self-centered thought that lies behind them, and the wish to protect ourselves, the wish to control, the wish to keep peace. Yeah. So, but it's these things of how the self-centered manifests are so sneaky, because for some people, the way they self-protect is by not saying anything. Okay? So it's not the behavior that we have to look out for. It's the motivation for the behavior. Because keeping silent for some people is very important so they can really check their motivation and not splash their opinions out on everybody. For other people, keeping silence is an escape, a way of not dealing with the situation. Okay? For other people, voicing opinions is just more blah, blah, ego. Whereas for some people, voicing their ideas and opinions and advice is done with compassion and benefits others. Okay? So it all boils down to looking at our mind and what our intention is. Okay?